Mit Großbritannien liegt Österreich, man möchte fast meinen, in einem Konflikt. Großbritannien will die Atomkraft ausbauen, braucht dazu aber Subventionen, die von der Europäischen Kommission genehmigt werden müssen. Das Okay aus Brüssel haben die Briten. Dafür aber nun bald eine Klage Österreichs vor dem Europäischen Gericht am Hals. Not amused or business as usual? Ich bin gespannt auf die Ausführungen von Antony Froggatt, dem Mitautor des jährlich erscheinenden World Nuclear Industry Status Report, der in unbestechlicher Regelmäßigkeit aufzeigt, dass die Atomkraft an Bedeutung verliert. Antony Froggatt arbeitet seit 15 Jahren als Berater von Umweltorganisationen, akademischen und politischen Organisationen in Europa und Asien, und Antony ist als Forschungsmitarbeiter der Universität Exeter tätig. Und Antony wird auf die spannende Frage eingehen: Neue Atomreaktoren in Großbritannien, werden sie überhaupt gebraucht?
Great. Well, thank you very much. It really is a great honor to be in Linz. I haven't been here for many years, so it's really nice to be back here to see old friends and to give an opportunity to present on Hinkley. So I was warned very strongly, keep it to 20 minutes. So we will see. To the translators, I've snuck in 2 extra slides, so I'm sorry about that. I'll warn you when it comes up, but I just thought, in light of some of the discussions today, I've changed it slightly in terms of the presentation. So what I want to run through, and again, I've changed it slightly from the outline, because I'm not going to go into the alternatives, because I think I'm probably not the best qualified to do that, and I think probably what's more interesting is the politics. So we can discuss it afterwards in terms of the alternatives, but I thought what I'd go through is a little history of where we are in the UK, where we are with nuclear new build, because people know about Hinkley, but there's other things on the table. To highlight, because it's been a recurring theme within the conference, the changing directions of renewables versus nuclear economics. Then to recap on the state aid, and then to conclude. So I hope that we can get through that. Again, the translators, I do tend to talk very fast, so please wave if you can't keep up, and I apologize. So in terms of the prospects, let me just turn that around so I didn't keep turning around. So the last nuclear power plant to be built in the UK was Sizewell. It's a pressurized water reactor. It was completed in 1995. When they first put forward the idea that they were going to build Sizewell, they said this was going to be the first of 10. And this was Margaret Thatcher said, we're going to build 10 reactors, and this is the first. So politicians don't always get their way, even in the UK, on nuclear. We have 3 designs of reactors. The Magnoxes, which are basically plutonium production reactors. So after the Second World War, they took the initial small reactors and made them slightly bigger, and we made lots of them. And they really are just lumps of concrete producing plutonium, and there is one left. I think they've closed around 24, 25. And then we have the second generation, which is called the advanced gas reactors, and there's 14 of those in operation, 14 reactors. And they are very odd. They're a very odd design of reactor. There's no serialization between them, so each one of them is very different. They're all expected to close by 2024, and this is a date that the government and the industry keep saying, by 2024, all the advanced gas reactors will be closed and we'll just be left with one reactor. Clearly, it's not the case. They are extending the life of the reactors by a 7-year period. I don't know why 7 years, but roughly they're saying each reactor is extended for 7 years, and then we'll see what happens. But as I said, you can't really make a judgment across the whole fleet because they're significantly different. So it was 2006 that the then Prime Minister of the UK said nuclear power is back on the agenda with a vengeance. Up until then, the Labour Party and the Conservatives basically saying no to nuclear, it's too expensive, but he said no, we're going to put it back on the agenda. And then this larger quote is from the coalition government. So we've just had elections in May, and 5 years before that, for the first time for a number of decades, we had a coalition government between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats had previously been opposed to nuclear power and the Conservatives in favour, so they had a coalition agreement. And they said it was very clear it would be built by 2018 and there would be no subsidies. And this was written in the coalition agreement. For those that can't read it, it says, to be clear, this means there will be no levy, no direct payment, no market support for nuclear power. And then they put in this language underneath it, unless it applies to other technologies. So that then gave them the room to say, oh no, it's like a feed-in tariff for renewables. So it's also interesting to note that in 2000 they said it would be completed in 2018. So that's 8 years late, and now 5 years further on, it's now another 8 years. So the government really didn't succeed in moving the debate forward very much in its term of office. As I mentioned, we had an election earlier this month. There was great surprise in the outcome, and it means that we have a purely Conservative administration. And they are, in terms of nuclear, they'll remain the same, they'll remain supportive, but I think very importantly, they are more sceptical about renewables. And so specifically, they are saying that wind, sort of onshore wind, can only be built if there is the explicit support of the local community. So we're not quite sure how that will be defined, but very clearly it swings the balance away from the developers to those people that want to oppose it. They're also very pro-fracking, and they'll remove all subsidies for onshore wind. So when it's approved, it's yet to be published, but when it's approved, it's likely that it would be lead to a slowdown of renewables. Why this is important, and for those that don't know, the UK has a thing called a Climate Change Act that legally binds the government to reducing emissions. So not only do we have the EU targets, but we have very specific UK targets that are set for every 5 years. And I think it's a very good system, and it ensures that the government continues down the trajectory for reducing emissions. And the objective within the power sector, and so, is that by 2030, the average emissions from all of the power stations will be somewhere between around 50 and 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So, and this is where we are now. So basically, moving from around 150 to somewhere between 50, to around 50 grams of CO2. So, a really quite rapid decline of emissions need to come from the power sector over a relatively short period of time. And this is quite tightly binding on governments. For me, this is a really important thing to understand in terms of the debate around nuclear, because you have this framework that is supposed to drive investment and drive government policy. Maybe I will miss this one out. So I mentioned that we have the advanced gas reactors that are supposed to close by 2024. And what I've done here is put together various scenarios about what the installed capacity will be for nuclear from now through until 2030. And this is the one that I've called the industrial scenario. So this is the advanced gas reactors not getting life extensions, and then we're left by mid-20s with just Sizewell in operation. I think that's quite interesting because that is pretty close to the phase-out for nuclear power in Germany. And there you have a widespread political debate about what we're going to do with our energy sector and the fact we don't want nuclear. But under this scenario, we have basically a de facto industrial nuclear phase-out that is on a par with Germany. And it's an important consideration. You have then this one here, which you can just about see, this green one here, which is my plant life extension scenario, and it matches with the Department of Energy and Climate Change low nuclear scenario. So basically they're saying limited life extension, but still by the mid-2020s you are having less than half the current level of nuclear power as we have today. this one here, this huge increase in nuclear, comes from the Climate Change Committee. So the people that I mentioned before that are charged by the government to set up independent advice about how we meet our emissions reductions are saying, well, actually what we need is a really quite significant increase in the use of nuclear power in order to meet our emissions reductions. And even this one here, which is their low nuclear scenario, sees 15 gigawatts of nukes in operation by 2030, which is the government's basically objective. So you can see that framing that comes both from the government and from those that are charged with developing sort of the climate change objectives for the government. So, new reactors. Going back, we had Tony Blair in 2002 saying nuclear power is back on the agenda with a vengeance. And then it took a number of years for them to finally get round to commissioning or launching the process for the building of new reactors. So that was 2006. And as we've discussed, or has been mentioned today, Hinkley is the one furthest advanced. And the current price, if you take the Commission's numbers, which include the financing costs, so it's £34 billion, it's about 43 billion euros, which is quite a lot for about 3.2 or 3.3 gigawatts of capacity. So really, really very expensive nuclear. And in order for this to be built, because obviously EDF is not in a position to fund that type of project, there's two things that is needed. There is needed a financial framework that reassures investments about the viability of the project, which is both due to the high price, but also because of the past experience of EPR building in France, Finland, and increasingly in China. They developed this support framework. So it is twofold. And in some ways, people know a lot about the strike price, this £92.5 per megawatt hour for a 35-year period. But there is also a 10 billion euros or 10 million pound debt financing option. So the government is basically supporting it in two ways. One is making it cheaper to access finance, and the second by guaranteeing a fixed price for electricity. As was mentioned, this £92 a megawatt hour is index linked. So that is in 2012 figures. If we assume that it operates in 2024, it's £121 a megawatt hour. By around 2030, it's £150 a megawatt hour. And if you think that basically the electricity price is linked to the gas price, it's linked to the oil price, that roughly translates into an oil price of $200 a barrel. So the assumption that the government is doing is that will be roughly the price of electricity. And this is highlighted in this graphic. So this is the Department of Energy and Climate Change. They do scenarios for oil and gas prices going forward. And this was in the year that the Hinkley deal was struck. So since then, gas prices and oil prices have fallen. So this scenario would be moved down a few levels. But what you can see here is, firstly, the statement that the government put out at the time of the decision. And it says, we estimate that the UK nuclear build programme will save households £74 a year. Good deal, wouldn't you think? Between 2026 and 2030. So this is over this very short period of time here, they managed to find, under a high gas price scenario, that for a few years it may be cheaper. Because the contracts for different work slightly different from a feed-in tariff. What they do is that it's a fixed price, it says here, and it says when the price is below this, then the consumers give to the utility. When it's above, then the utility gives back to the consumer. So this is a good balancing mechanism. But obviously it depends on what the price is set at. So obviously then this is, yeah, as I said, this is in constant pounds, constant 2012 figures. But as I mentioned, it's going to go up and up and up over a period of time. So it really is quite a good deal for EDF. And so, as I said, this is the framework that is needed in order to bring in the investors. And as is currently suggested, so I'm just checking my time, it will go by, there's 4 key partners. EDF Group, so obviously that they will do between 45 and 50%. Areva, which is now in not such a good economic shape, having lost around 5 billion last year. So the rumor is that EDF and Arriva will merge. There's a thing on Reuters today saying it's going to be announced in the next couple of days. So we'll have to see what that looks like. But then you would then see potentially this group, which isn't in the best financial shape, having to put up to 60% of the project, would seem a little unlikely. And then there's the Chinese investors. So China General Nuclear Corporation and China National Nuclear Corporation. At the time of the deal, it was said that they would be investors only. But it transpires in the last couple of weeks that they will actually be equipment suppliers as well. So they've been holding out for the deal because they want to get into the UK. Basically, they've only built reactors so far in Pakistan, China, and they want to build in OECD countries in order to reference themselves and be able to export reactors to other countries. So it's a clear way into the Western market for China. And why not do it when you're guaranteed a rate of return of around 20%? It's quite a good deal. And then there's other countries that are talked about. Saudi Arabia has been mentioned in the British press, but we really don't know. So that's one of the deals. But the other thing to note that is in 2006, when the government launched its plan, there was going to be 3 reactors, 3 different sets of projects going ahead. And then they basically fell by the wayside. So Horizon was originally owned by E.ON and RWE and is now owned by Hitachi. And Nugen was changed its ownership structure, is now largely owned by Toshiba Westinghouse. This is important for 2 reasons. One is when they stopped being part of the process, EDF was the sole party negotiating with the British government. And I think that is why the price has got so high, because EDF have said, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? There was no plan B. And I think it's the fundamental problem with the system, and I think it's where the government failed to act responsibly, because it should have had a second offer on the table, said, if we don't do nuclear, we'll do energy efficiency, or we'll do renewables, or some other low-carbon option. But as it was, they left themselves open to basically blackmail. And then the other thing to note is that these are Japanese firms who are interested in investing. And that's, again, coming back to Fukushima. They can't build at home. If you want to maintain a nuclear business, you have to build somewhere. And so UK is a good market. Again, potentially good business. But yeah, it's just important to note its importance. So we've mentioned the strike price. Again, I won't touch upon this in too much detail, but it's absolutely fundamentally important that over the period that this has been negotiated, the price of renewables have fallen significantly. And so these are general ones. The only one I would note here, because nobody else has mentioned it so far, is this Dubai deal from January of this year. Really quite staggering. Is basically the builders that won the tender saying that they're going to build solar PV at 5.8 cents a kilowatt hour, which is 51 euros a megawatt hour. Now, this is just remarkably cheap. Obviously, it's in Dubai, it's different conditions, but it basically outbid gas in a gas-producing country. So really quite significant shifts. And then the second is the whole development of electricity storage. And so this regression line that you see in terms of costs of solar is now being mirrored by storage. So the idea that we will have a combined solar PV and storage system is really much on the cards. And there was an announcement, I don't know if people saw it, by Tesla, who build the electric vehicles, the Volt, the domestic home pack, will really drive down the cost of storage to such an extent that you'll see some of the issues around balancing really significantly reduced. So we know that difference globally, but what I think is remarkable in terms of the price differential, I'm sorry you can't see this, but these are all solar. So these are the contracts for difference. So here we have nuclear at around 92 pounds a megawatt hour. And these are the contracts for difference for the renewables, which were signed last year. And so here we have advanced conversion, biomass, here we have solar, here we have onshore wind, and here we have offshore wind. So even in the context of the UK, nuclear is now already more expensive than renewables, and we know that they have a fixed feed-in tariff for 35 years. So it really is expensive, even in the context of the UK. So I'll just touch upon some of the state aid issues, because I think it's already been mentioned in some detail. So we know the timing, it was published. I think what is really interesting to note is the extent to which at least the UK press and the UK were really surprised at how damning the initial critique was published by the Commission. And so the Daily Telegraph is a very right-wing paper. The Financial Times is the sort of the paper for the city. And the Daily Telegraph called it a damning critique, and a scathing assessment comes from the Financial Times. So they were quite shocked at the extent to which the Commission was critical of the project. And it's critical, here are some of the key points. One that I've mentioned is it's a combination of price support mechanisms and credit protection. So yeah, two major ways to give funding. The Commission noted that these supports were worth £17.6 billion to the builders. So really huge degrees of financial support being made available. And they said that other projects could be built without state aid, so why should nuclear? For those that want a good critique, there's an independent financial advising house called Liberium Capital. I can send it to you. They do a very good critique of it, but I think one of the interesting things for me is they say that the rate of return will be somewhere between 25 and 35%. So huge profit margins being anticipated by them. And as we know, the Commission finally approved the project, and we now have a 2-month consultation process, or a 2-month period in which people will make comments. And as we've heard, Austria, Luxembourg, and potentially others will be engaged within this decision making. So we'll have to see what that actually means to the project. But just to finish up, just want to put this up. So this is the increase in, or this is the electricity production within the UK over time. Really just to note that we've basically reached peak consumption, and it's going down quite quickly in terms. So this has huge implications for the traditional utilities because the renewable industry is coming in. So within the UK, by 2020, around 30% of the country's electricity must come from renewables, which is like a 4-fold increase over a 2-decade period. When you have declining consumption, then this rapidly squeezes out the conventional players. And this is what you're seeing. So 2014 was a crossover for the first time between, at the top here, this is electricity coming from nuclear, and this is electricity being produced by renewables. So, and this is the trajectory that has to go up. So it really is although we are seen as very pro-nuclear, in actual fact, renewables are quietly moving along. I won't go into that just in terms of time. But just to summarize, I think the question of Hinkley is in the balance. I think it's very difficult to call what will happen. On the one hand, I see huge economic problems with EDF and Areva. So are they wanting to put up the cash? Are they able to put up the cash? And more importantly, at what price? How much will it cost them to put up the money? And what does that do to the economics of the project? I think there's questions over the Chinese investors. How much are they put off by the problems that they've seen with the EPR pressure vessel? Do they go, actually, we're messing up at home. Do we really want to get involved in this? I think what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is maybe they're moving more in the direction, seeing the opportunities that this creates. I think the state aid question is not settled. I think if we assume the Austrians and the Luxembourgs put their complaint in, how does the British government react and the French government? Do they say, we have to wait to the decision? Or do they take out some insurance policy to say, actually, we want you to proceed, and should the decision go against us, we'll deal with it then? I really don't know which way it will go on that regard. I think also against it is the technology. The EPR has been shown to be a bad reactor design in every site that it's being built. And why do we think the British will do it any better? We haven't got a very good history of that. So I think it's a bad technology choice for the UK. And the cost. I mean, one of the graphs I wanted to show before, but I've run out of time, is when the government first said it wanted to go back into nuclear, EDF put in its bid, and it said it would build nuclear in the UK at £30 a megawatt hour. So it's more than 3 times that in less than a decade, and they haven't even built it yet. So it really is expensive, and I think it's increasingly recognised. So you can see, okay, it shouldn't go ahead. But on the other hand, we have a British government that is developed the project. It is bound by climate change objectives. It has an aging nuclear fleet, and it doesn't like renewables. So how is it going to square this circle between reducing emissions as required and not liking renewables without nuclear? Something has to give, and so this is a political conundrum for the UK government. And I think that is also then linked to this idea about the project inertia. There's a lot of people who have worked in the government for a number of years on this project. There's a lot of people in EDF who've worked in the UK developing this project for a number of years. There's a number of politicians, parliamentarians, all of which have supported this project for a number of years. And you need to have something quite remarkable to shake them off. And I think that is the problem that we have in terms of project inertia. It's been going for years and years and years. How is it going to get derailed? It requires something significant. The international importance we've touched upon. So in terms of Japan wants to develop in the UK, China wants to build somewhere in Europe. UK is a good example. Other countries are looking for state aid approval, all of which are pointing in this direction. So there's a lot of, although it's a UK government decision effectively, we know the UK and French government decision, there is wider players within this field. And finally, I don't think there's adequate public scrutiny. I mean, I think this is one of the basic problems, is you have all major parties in the Parliament in favour of it. There is very little debate about nuclear. And I think that translates into insufficient scrutiny. I mean, if the Conservatives were consistent that they don't like renewables because they're expensive, then why are they supporting nuclear that's more expensive? There is not enough discussion about the implications of this. So, I don't know. Maybe it's for the discussion at the end. Thank you very much.